Leaders get born, but you lead when you choose to lead. And the choices that you make as a leader determines your leadership. I'm so damn proud of each one of you for making the choice to be here today. Yes, we are. Okay, so what I'm going to get you to do is every person standing would have to change their place and move to another place. So people from here would change with the first row here. So everyone standing, change with the people standing on this side. And you guys would, so 1 second. So these guys are moving to here. This one here, and you guys are moving there, if that makes sense. So you have to rotate. So I didn't actually want it to make trouble for you guys, but it just gives me a little joy to see people moving around. You will understand my concept in a while, but this is the beginning. Here today, I'll take you on a refugee journey. Through my journey, there are ups and there are downs. There are moments that I cherish the most in my life, but there are also stories of moments that I never want to ever talk about, but I do it anyways. So I ask you, each one of you, to stay compassionate and show empathy and try to receive my story with your full heart open. So my story is, I wouldn't say it's one in a million, but it is one that not everyone would have heard about, because you may never had the chance to hear from someone who's a woman, a refugee, a Muslim, and lives in Australia. So that brings me to the first point. I am an Aussie, a former refugee who lives in Sydney, Australia. I study in my undergraduate at the moment in Western Sydney, and I also work as a full-time youth development officer at a local council in Sydney. So let's move on to how my story began. 70.8 million people are displaced, and this is the global trend from 2018. Those from Australia, can you show up your hands? Wow. Okay, another proud moment. Yay. So the number of people that are displaced make up to almost three times the population of Australia. Do you realize it's a huge number? But with so many countries, why aren't these 70.8 million people suffering? There are a highest than ever number of people that are displaced around the world. So, what does a displaced person define? How are they defined? So first, when a person is displaced from their country, they become an asylum seeker. Asylum seeker is a person who is outside their own country and cannot safely return as a result of conflict or persecution based on following. But then, I wanted to go through these definitions because often people don't get it. It's hard to understand that not every displaced person is a refugee, unless a person is recognized or given the status of a refugee by UNHCR. I heard that there is an immigration detention center here in Bangkok. And even talking to Kim, we were confused about whether it is a refugee detention center or is it just immigration detention center? Because I was also thinking that there are people that are seeking asylum that are in that detention center. So yes, people that are seeking asylum, currently, they're detained in Bangkok, where we as peacemakers are meeting. The global displacement trend would tell you that majority of refugees come from just 5 countries. And majority of them are hosted just by 5 countries. And here is a question for you guys. If we are gathered from 50 countries here, and there are so many other countries that can host refugees, then why aren't they hosting refugees when there is a big displacement numbers? You need to take that question back to your country, the agency that you work for, the organization that you're involved in, and maybe do your research and find out more, because I am also interested to explore why. Okay, so children below 18 years of age made up to about half of the refugee population in 2018. And that just breaks my heart. That breaks my heart because that's where my story began. And I know that for so many other refugee families, it's so tough to be traveling with children, with minors. So I was 6. I was born in Afghanistan. It's a country that I'm sure you would have all heard about on the news, reading articles about how horrible the situation for people in Afghanistan are. I was born in Uruzgan, and Uruzgan is always the topic. It's always talked about. But what people don't pay attention to is that Uruzgan is also home to many, and many of them are just innocent people who were just born there. When I was born in Uruzgan, and I was growing up, I mean, I'm sure you would all know that by age of 6, you can't really understand much, but you can understand enough. So I thought my world was so small, no electricity. I never saw television. No one ever had a television in my village. We didn't have electricity. And that's the type of shattered world that I lived in. And for me, that was heaven. Because I could just play as a kid. I could do anything I wanted. I could go and swim in the river. This is a village close by where I live, and it's very similar to the village that I lived in. The river runs through, this river you can see in the image, runs through my village, and I remember swimming in that river when I was growing up, and that was the most graceful thing that I did as a child. And I haven't actually found the same joy in doing anything else so far, with the hope that one day maybe I could experience the same thing again. But reality is far more serious and real. yes, it snows in my village. And growing up, I have beautiful memories of snow, the smell, and when the sun would come back, the excitement, getting out of home and playing in the snow. Those were some precious moments of my life. It's so beautiful, right? Had you ever seen this side of Afghanistan? No? Had you ever heard about it? No, because you didn't meet RAHILA, right? So, the world that I called heaven was soon to destroy it. Slowly growing up, I could see the injustice, and it was getting worse. A good friend of mine, my best friend, someone that I played with, someone that we shared secrets with, BFF. One day, some men covered in masks walked in and murdered her father. She didn't come to play with me after that. I think the family was so fearful of the people that had done such horrible thing that they no longer even wanted to let one member of the family walk outside, except for the men. It doesn't hit home unless you experience it yourself, unless you go through some type of experience that actually makes you suffer. I mean, as a child, I wouldn't have understood much. But slowly, I started questioning things. Why do men have to put beard, long beard? They can't shave their beards. That was a law, a rule by Taliban, an extremist group in Afghanistan. Then, when it was winter, and in winter, the school system in Afghanistan mostly works that in winter, the school starts. And that's when people take school more seriously because it's snowing, you can't really work outside much, so people stay inside and they do schooling and kids get involved. So my cousins would leave house every morning in winter and go to school. This is a school in our village, and it's called madrasa. It's religious studies. Not you don't study English there. No one ever speaks English. If a person knows one alphabet of English, then they're called a doctor. So what happens, my cousins get to go and learn, and I have this fire inside me that I want to learn too. I want to explore. And I ask this question from my father. I say, Dad, can I go to school too? He says, not here, not in our village, but in the city, there are schools where girls and boys can go and study. Well, I asked him about what does it look like? He says, it's a classroom, and then it has a blackboard, and a teacher stands there with a chalk, and The students sit with their pens and paper, and the teacher teach, and the students write. This was a dream, to be able to sit in a classroom like that. Following that, constantly I'm actually like daydreaming about it, but then also when I sleep at night, I dream about it as well. And so one day, I asked my mum if I could go to school, and she said no. I said, why? Because you're a girl. Well, what does that mean? If I'm a girl, I can't do things, but I'm really good at things, and I'm better than my cousins. I race with them, and I always win. No matter what we play, I'm always the smarter one. So why can't I go to school? She had no answer. But you know what happens when you don't have answers for kids. They figure it out by themselves, right? So one day, the troublemaker me dresses up in my cousin's clothes after they have left the house and goes to school, following them. I went to school, and when I walked through the door, the boys start whispering to each other, "Oh, look, Rahila's here. What is she doing here?" I go and sit in a corner quietly and just want to take the pleasure of this moment. I've made it. I'm in a classroom. But this quite doesn't look like the classroom that I see in my dreams, but it's okay. I'm still in a classroom. And this is the moment that I want to experience. It didn't take long for the teacher to realize that there is a girl in the class and she shouldn't be here. So he stands up and yells at me and throws me out of the classroom. Have to make my way back home. And I start crying, and just, it takes me too long to get home because on the way I just stop somewhere, cry, and then walk again, and then sit somewhere. I'm so damn frustrated about this thing that only boys are allowed to go to school. At that point, I kind of was questioning my abilities. Is there something wrong with me that I can't do what others can do? Or then I think about, oh, other girls can't go either. But then, you know, those all questions in your head. Then, what I didn't actually understand was that it was going to change my world. It was something far too serious than what I was imagining. That night, there was tension amongst my family members. I could sense it. No one was talking to me. My father was so threatened that he could not look me in the eye. But I couldn't understand that. My mother was shaking. She was walking all around the house, confused, lost. I think she knew that she was going to lose me. So my father had taken the decision to take me somewhere where I could not return back from, because the Taliban had found out that someone from a Hazara family, a girl, has tried to go to school, and that's against their rule. That's an excuse for them to torture my family. I had made so much trouble for my family that I could not imagine. The next morning, without even saying goodbyes, I had to leave. And so that's a situation where a child becomes displaced. We left the rest of my family members in Afghanistan, and my dad was taking me to a land where he thought I might be safe, because the Taliban had told my dad that if I'm seen in the village again, I'd be killed. No parent can ever stand that. They cannot keep their child inside all the time when they're fearful for their life. So I remember that was one of the experiences that I could say was the worst thing that I experienced as a child. Then crossing the border. Well, for us to get to Pakistan, which is a neighborhood country, my dad had to talk to smugglers that would get us across the border because we had no documentations. And the decision to leave was made overnight, so nothing in ideal world of making a passport, getting a visa, any of that was not an option. It was dark when we were crossing the border, so my dad was holding me in his arms, and we were running as there was shooting on us. And this, I could feel the bullets hitting the floor as we were running. And I was sensing that one of these bullets might hit me or my dad sometime soon. But as my dad was running, he was holding me in his arms, and he was bent over me so that if a bullet sort of hits him, it goes through him to reach me. Now, no matter what religion, no matter what background you're from, you don't deserve that. No father should ever go through that experience, and no child should ever experience that either. But trust me, children and parents who are displaced, they experience more horrific things than that. It's just the matter that I get this opportunity to stand here and tell my story. Those 70.8 million people displaced around the world needs to be heard as well. Those policymakers who sit in their comfortable chairs in their offices and sign things that they don't understand the circumstances, they don't understand the consequences, and it costs innocent people's lives. the women, they stay home and don't do much. Do we actually have a choice to not live like that if we're not ever shown how else we could live our lives? If we are shattered in a world where we can't even have access to television, if we can't have access to electricity, if we can't make any contacts outside our village, how else would you expect us to live? Do you also get the same answer that I'm getting right now? Yes, it's done on purpose. Some people are left unseen, unheard, and that's okay for people. I'm talking for those that doesn't want to listen, doesn't want to hear. But some people make it out of there, and I was one of the lucky ones that did. And that was by choice. You lead by choice. You become a leader by choice. So the genocide against Hazaras, and I am a Hazara, an ethnic minority that lives in Afghanistan. That's where our home is. That's where we belong. But the majority who also call Afghanistan home would deny the fact that Hazaras belong to Afghanistan. So we become the subject to discrimination, abuse, torture, and everything else you want to name. And again, that is okay because we look Asian. We're really easy to be distinguished from others. And we also come from a religious minority. Yes, I am a Muslim, but Muslims have different groups in them. And I come from a minority group of Muslims in Afghanistan. And that's the second reason that I'm attacked. Those pictures of lands and beautiful orchard you saw before, I'm talking about these ones. These are owned by Hazara people. My parents owned a whole village, but unfortunately, the ownership of land is taken away from Hazara people. And that started during Taliban's ruling in Afghanistan. That was one of the reasons why my family was always subject to discrimination and torture. But what is different about Hazara people? Yes, we do look different, easy to be distinguished from the majority. But also, some of our values are against Taliban and their ruling. Things such as girls should not have access to education. But my father never believed or thought that I was not capable of getting education. So I wasn't taught that values when I was growing up. It was just later on that I faced the reality that in the world that I lived, and by people that it was ruled, they believed I did not have, or I did not deserve to be at school. So after we leave Afghanistan, we move to a place called Quetta, and it's just across the border from Afghanistan. It's in Pakistan, and it's part of Pakistan. Majority of Hazara people that leave their country and escape violence, they move to Quetta and live there as a place where they could seek some safety. So my dad, he takes me to Quetta and he leaves me there with my grandparents and auntie. And he has to go back to Afghanistan because he still has the responsibility of looking after my family. Now, can you imagine being displaced at the age of 6 and having gone through that experience and then try to live a normal life while you're not really a normal child anymore because you don't have your parents, you have seen horrific things that you shouldn't have seen, and that you're still subject to violence and you're still a target in the place that you currently live. When you have time, I want you to go on and do some research about the living of Hazara people in Quetta. And so one time, I left home and I'm walking to school, and there is a big explosive in the place near my school. I was knocked out. When I woke up, all I see is a field of dead bodies. And this is just when I was 7. Apparently a group of people that are so against Hazaras, they would bring a car that is full of explosive and they would leave it in the Hazara populated area. And when they leave, it kills hundreds of people. People in that place leaves home every morning and wouldn't know if they're going to return. So every morning, when I was leaving for school, I would say goodbye to my grandparents as if I was not coming back home again. That's what it takes to get education in countries like Pakistan. Now, some people say, well, that's not target killing. That's not just against Hazaras. Yes, I do agree. But I also agree with the fact that we can't close our eyes just because not only Hazaras are the target. And I do feel empathy for every other group of people that are victim of the same violence in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in India, in any part of the world. Just because you belong to a certain religion, just because you belong to a certain ethnicity, you don't deserve to be treated a certain way. It does not justify it. So, then people say, if you're a refugee, if you're an asylum seeker and you're living in another country, why don't you refer to a refugee camp and get processed from there? Well, let me tell you, that's a very ideal world. In my world, there was no refugee camp. I had never heard of UNHCR. And let me tell you, average wait for people that go to refugee camps in countries like Indonesia and so many other countries, average wait is 15 years. Just imagine your 1-year-old kid growing up to 25 years old in a refugee camp. Would you want that for yourself? For your kids? For people that you love? But what if even that is not an option? Because it wasn't for me, it wasn't for my family. Then how are people defined when they live in a second country and are seeking to be processed or resettled in a third country? So they're called urban refugees. But I wasn't even there because I didn't actually have the status of refugee. So maybe I was called urban asylum seeker. And that's even an unknown term, so who cares anyways. Let me tell you a little bit of a story of a woman that I met in Quetta. This is Amina, the woman that's in the white scarf. And I also ask that if I'm sharing this story, it's very confidential, and I also would like to request people not to share this photograph if they're taking photos of the slides. So this is Amina, and this is 2 of her daughters. I met Amina and her family when I was in Quetta. Amina's daughters were really young, and they were not even in the age to go to school when I was going to school in Quetta. She was a lovely lady, a lady with a big heart for family. She would cook beautiful meals and sometimes just bring it to me. And then Amina's husband he was unsafe in Quetta, and this is also a very personal, there is a personal reason behind it, but he was targeted, so he was going to seek protection in Australia. He took the boat from Indonesia to get to Australia, but unfortunately, the boat that he was on drowned and he didn't make it. Now, Amina has 3 daughters and 2 sons. And this time, just before I came to Bangkok, I met Amina in Pakistan again, in Quetta. Just because she doesn't actually have a man in the house anymore, her daughters are subject to sexual abuse. And this breaks my heart because why? She applied for UNHCR's protection about 8 years ago, and after that, she did not even hear back. And how long would it take for her to get processed? And if not, what would happen to her daughters? Luckily, my story is different. In 2009, finally, after my dad had lost every other male family members, my grandpa, my uncle, he decided that he had enough and he no longer wanted to be on his lands. He no longer wanted the ownership of his lands. He decided to leave Afghanistan because he was fearing for his life. He sent everyone to Pakistan, so my mom, my siblings, and from a place called Kandahar, he trusted some men who said to my dad that we would take you to a safe land, somewhere where Taliban cannot reach you. And so desperate for his life, he had no other way but to trust these men and give these men all the money that he had so that the Taliban wasn't coming after him and killing him and his family. Those are choices that a displaced parent would make. So my dad trusted these men and went with them. For months, we didn't even hear back from my dad. We had lost hope. So many horrible stories came to us, so many of people coming telling us, your dad would never return. Stop hoping for his return. Now, when we had given hope, one day, we receive a call, and there's only one mobile phone in our house, and it's broken, but the call comes and I can't really press the button because it's broken. So I press it with my teeth, and then I pick up the phone and it's my dad. By that time, I had forgotten how my dad sounded like, or my consciousness could not believe that it was my dad. But he was calling from a place called Christmas Island. What he kept repeating was that you guys are safe. My family is safe, you're safe, your mom is safe. I have made it somewhere where I could bring you all here, and no one can ever reach you or harm you. Well, that is a world you could dream for. Then, luckily, he made it out of the detention center and he was granted a visa to live in Australia. And slowly we figured out how my dad got to Australia. You've heard a lot about illegal refugees, right? And people from Australia, I wouldn't be surprised. You would have heard a lot. Illegal maritime arrivals. That's what we're called. Well, my dad was called at that time, or he would be called if it was under the current policy. So my dad got on a boat that took 12 days and nights to get to Christmas Island. That's basically suicide. When you get on a boat, you're risking your life. But what my dad says, he says, when I was getting on a boat, I knew that I was making an effort to save my family, because otherwise I would have done nothing. I couldn't have done anything else. So that was the only option. Sacrifice yourself, and if you make it safe to the other side, then your family is safe. Otherwise, like what happened to Amina's husband, would have happened to me and my family. And let me tell you, domestic violence, sexual abuse, PTSD, and all kind of other things that we all run away from exist in my community, and it's so bad. But I don't blame them. This is how we were forced to live our lives. I can't stand here and say, oh, I'm ashamed that I'm a Muslim and that I had to grow up in Afghanistan and that I was a refugee. I wouldn't say that. I'm a proud Muslim, a proud refugee, and anything that comes when people look at me and give me a status. Just as someone is born blonde, and you can't deny that fact, right? I mean, no matter how many times you color your hair, but you're gonna go back to blonde again. I cannot deny the fact that I belong to Afghanistan, that I was born there, I'm an ethnic minority, I look Asian, and all the other things. I can't also accept the fact that I want to live my life with guilt because I was born that way. Or that I should accept everything that happened to me was fair because I was born a certain way, as part of a certain group. So, well, you would have now figured it out that my conclusion of my story, at least ending in Australia, was a positive one, and that I have been extremely lucky to be one of those 70.8 million people who has been able to seek protection in a country that is safe. That's the kind of boat that people get onto when they want to get to Australia. 70 or up to 105 people are placed in a fishing boat and they just set in the sea to get to Australia. There can be kids, women, but they still get on that boat because they have no other option. Die or maybe survive anyways. But then you would still go for the way that at least have a little light at the end of the tunnel. Well, let me remind you, if we talk about the groups of people that came to Australia as refugees, often people say, oh, kick Muslims out of Australia, as if Australia was owned by one group of people forever. Certain groups of people have come at certain time to Australia. And now that they have settled in Australia, I'm not saying that other groups haven't gone through the same kind of discrimination, but all I'm saying is that the displacement trend continues. and people do have to seek protection in other countries. They do have to migrate, and when they do, their experience does not have to be the unpleasant and the most horrific one. We could take actions to make it easier, at least for the sake of children, because they have done no wrong to anyone, and they don't deserve anything that's happening to them. This picture is kind of looking funny, but this is just me and two of my sisters and two of my brothers. Their faces are not showing. Just after we went to Australia. It's a picture that I always look at, and I feel like this was the moment that we finally felt like we had a home. A home that was safe, that we could sleep peacefully at night, not thinking someone would come and grab one of us in the morning and kill. We thought we had finally found peace. But then the definition of peace at that time was so big for us that only peaceful sleep or having a house or having a home was enough to call it peace. It's slowly when you get into the reality of life in Australia. So I started a journey of advocacy and activism in Australia when I realized that many refugees or refugee children in Australia was not getting a fair treatment like I did. So I started talking about children's rights and advocating for children's rights in Australia. And it took me to become a UNICEF Australia ambassador until I was heard more and until I was given a louder voice where I could actually reach out to more people and say, this is how refugee children are suffering in Australia. The detention centers, the refugee, I think we can't call it refugee camps because, again, it's just immigration detention centers where people are kept in Australia. And it was getting horrible as days went past. But at least I was taking some sort of actions to bring peace to the lives of those that could not speak for themselves. Well, then, I'm not sure how I can figure this out. Can someone click on the first link? This is going to be a video that shows what other kind of peace could we expect in Australia, or could be done better so that people do feel in peace living in Australia.
When a young Muslim woman attended a Reclaim Australia rally and talked with anti-Islam protesters last month, she thought she'd helped bridge a gap between the two sides. Little did she know the encounter would be used as what she calls propaganda by the United Patriots Front, who claimed they'd educated her into questioning her faith. Now Rahila Haidary is fighting back, spreading the word about her culture and religion in the hope of combating the rise of anti-Islam groups. And the girl who once defied the Taliban says she's not afraid of the protesters. Lauren Day reports.
Reclaim Australia, round 3. We're here in numbers once again to show people that we have got the guts to stand up for this country.
At a Reclaim Australia rally in Perth last month, emotions were running high.
Because in modernism, coming together and expressing pride is an offensive racist thing. No. If this is so, then I'm the greatest racist on the planet.
But among the crowd, a young Afghan refugee had come thinking she could make a difference.
I actually went there to join the other side, but then before I go to the other side, I thought, why not just hear some of the reasons why these people are against Muslims before I go there.
This mateship.
She was quickly stopped by several members of the United Patriots Front, who asked to discuss her religion.
First, to begin with, they asked, do you agree with freedom? I said, yes, I do. And they asked, and then the next interesting question that they asked was that, would you call yourself a Muslim first or an Australian first? I kind of thought on that and I said, I would call myself an Australian first. And I was surprised. They said, why? Aren't you a proud Muslim? I said, I'm a proud Muslim. The reason that I would call myself an Australian first would be because Australian Constitution gives me the freedom to practice my religion. And that's why I respect this country. That's why I'm here today.
Rahila Haidary was happy to be photographed by the men she thought were keen to hear her perspective. But when the group posted the photo to their Facebook page, a very different version of events emerged.
This woman's going to go away and think about what we said to her. She may ultimately question her faith.
I was disappointed, really. I was really disappointed. The amount of hatred coming from that post, the comments were just heartbreaking. Some of them were really threatening. Wait until she walks outside and she gets her scarf pulled off. And that broke my heart.
Did you regret trying to have a conversation with them?
I did later on because I thought, well, maybe some people are not worth giving the time to.
Rahila Haidary knows a lot about conflict.
I was born in Uruzgan, Afghanistan. It's just the center of Afghanistan, a place that is always known by war, conflict, persecution against minority. I just grew up as a normal child, although I saw different things too a normal child would see, but and then just as another child, I just had a dream to start school someday.
At just 6 years old, she had to defy the Taliban to try to get an education.
And I thought, if I am a boy, then if I look like a boy, I might be able to go to school. So I dressed up in my cousin's clothes and went to school.
These days, she has a home among the gum trees, where she studies law and politics. But in Afghanistan, her desire to learn almost cost Rahila Haidary her life.
They had a really strict punishment for me. They said, either we have to take her life, or my dad had to send me somewhere that I couldn't come back.
Her father chose to send his daughter to Pakistan, where her family later joined and ultimately moved to Australia.
Whatever I have heard before about Australia from my dad or from other people was just good things. Australia is so peaceful. It's a country of love. Everyone cares about people. you have every right there. You can go to school. So I couldn't wait. To be honest, I couldn't wait to come here.
Drop the stick! Drop it!
The recent rallies around the country have made Rahila Haidary question her image of Australia as a peaceful place.
And it's hard for us to live with that idea that we're not welcomed. We're not even welcomed in Australia, even if we have been the victims of terrorism in our own country, and we have run away from that still. Now we're considered terrorists, and that doesn't make sense to me.
But the young student is refusing to be silenced so easily. She's planning a string of speaking events to discuss her experiences to young people and women's groups.
Nothing scares me, really. I'm the person who would just not tolerate the injustice and go out there and stand and say, hey, this is not right.
Would you ever confront those guys again at the Reclaim Australia rally?
If the need arises, then I would. If I feel that they need to be educated more, then I would go for it.
That's just to give you an idea of how peace can be defined differently in different concepts and in different scenarios. I'm not trying to offend the Australians here. I know that majority of Australians are lovely, kind, compassionate, and has truly made me feel welcomed in Australia. But at some point I was fearful of the future ahead, as these kind of groups were getting stronger and stronger in Australia. So during this time, I sat in a job interview where the interview panel, on the interview panel, and this hurts the most, a woman said to me that if I am employed, then would I consider not wearing a scarf at work? That was hurtful. In the meantime, my sisters were getting bullied just because they wrap a piece of headscarf around their head. My sister had her scarf pulled off at school so many times. And this experience made her not want to go to school again. And that even hurt more because I fought for education. My dad risked his life to bring us to Australia. And here, you experience the same thing again. Just because you look different. And then groups of young people sit here and talk about how can we make a difference? Well, here you go. Racism stops with me, and that's what I want every one of you to tell yourself. Because if you start thinking that way, then you start influencing other people, and that's good leadership. That's how you become a leader. And that's as simple as that. why do we refer to, I mean, every time someone has done something, we start by saying, a Muslim woman had done this. A Muslim man did this. A refugee woman did this. An African person did this. Why should it have to be like that? Why do we include a whole group of people when one person does something? Yes, there are so many Islamic extremists, and I even question this, that we say Islamic extremists. Why can't just extremists be extremists? Because extremism doesn't actually have a religion. I am a person of religion, and nowhere in my life I was taught that hurting somebody was part of religion. And therefore, I can never put my scarf away, because every value that I'm taught through my religion, I hold it so dearly, because it helps me be a good human. When I feel like I am holding the values of my religion, I feel like I'm a human and I love everybody. So from now on, I want to make this pledge that I want to commit to not including a group of people in my sentence when I'm talking about the actions of a certain group or a certain person. And I request that we all start practicing that and start conversations like that when we have someone talking like that. Because if you stop a friend and say, hey, stop here, I do really respect what you're saying, but I don't think it's appropriate that we are including a whole group of people in a sentence that relates to one person's action. I'm sure that would make a difference. And that's how you can make a difference. Small things. And that's not something that's hard. Oh gosh, it takes time, it takes energy. I can't do it. What would happen to my schooling and other things? That's as simple as that. Be practical. Be thoughtful. Be wise. Be mindful of other people and their experiences. And we have talked about this so many times through this summit, and we would continue. So what I'm currently doing, I'm working on a women empowerment project, as well as a youth-led youth empowerment program. And I'm happy to talk about it more if anyone is interested. But this is also my contact details. I am active on LinkedIn and Facebook. Feel free to get in contact with any questions. I also have sort of kind of gotten good at coaching young people and mentoring young people. So I would be more than happy to help anybody out if you think that I can be of any help. But other than that, I believe in the leadership path that you have all chosen, and the fact that you're here today makes a difference. And I hope that this journey would continue. And I hope to see you all in leadership positions. And please don't forget the story that I have told you, and I hope that that story that I have told you would make a difference in how you see other people. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Georgia from Australia.
Hello.
And in situations like this, I'm quite ashamed to call myself Australian.
Oh no, please.
But
I'm proud Australian.
I did want to thank you though for sharing your story. I'm just going to read from my book because I'm not very good at public speaking. But it's just a question and asking for some advice around feeling helpless.
Yeah.
So considering Australia's long history of harsh and extreme policies and positioning towards refugees and asylum seekers, how can we as young leaders continue to advocate for refugee and asylum seekers' rights and not become overwhelmed and defeated with feelings of helplessness and hopelessness due to conservative and extreme leaders like Peter Dutton, who continue to actively oppress displaced people and who also have such a strong position and control over our society today?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That's a really good question. Please. Well, I think I sort of touched base on this before, but as I said before, it's so easy to feel like you're helpless, you can't do much as a young person, but I think that, as I said before, change is really gradual and it's slow. And I'm so grateful for the effort of many organizations, many people that are advocating for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers in Australia. They're doing an amazing work, although they don't get any funding from state government. Even the support from general public is gone really low at the moment. But I think one thing that I would like to say that would make a difference is start local. Whether you're at university, I know that a lot of refugees that are now making it to university in Australia, they go through really hard process because firstly they don't, the asylum seekers, they don't get they don't get funding, so they can't apply for HECS. They have to either get a scholarship or they can't go to uni. But what if you, as a young person at that university, could advocate and bring a program at university where there are funding for asylum seekers or refugees that are temporary protection, on temporary protection visas? What if in your local community there is 2 families of refugees and the kids just need some sort of help with their education? And those are simple things. Trust me, there's more joy and pleasure for you than for them. And I do absolutely sort of admire people that does that kind of work because there's not much reward to it. You don't get to be featured on SBS, BBC for the work that you're doing, but trust me, for those people, your help and what you do makes a huge difference. And I still admire my ESL teacher at school because he made my experience a different one just because he was there part of the school. And he supported me and guided me through the school system in Australia. Be that person who makes the difference in someone's life.